So far, you've learned how to do monohybrid Punnett squares and dihybrid Punnett squares, but you've learned how to do both of them using the same type of trait. The trait that you've been dealing with has been one called complete dominance. In other words, it's the way Gregor Mendel explained that traits worked, where there was two versions of a trait, two different alleles, and one version was dominant, the other was recessive. The problem is that not all of our traits work that way. There are a number of exceptions to Mendel's rule. That principle of dominance doesn't apply to everything. And so as we go forward, we're going to learn some different types of traits and how to associate those with doing the correct type of Punnett square. We're going to deal with two together here today, and we're going to deal with them together because they behave very similarly in terms of how to do the correct Punnett square. One of those is called incomplete dominance. The other is called codominance. We'll deal with the idea of incomplete dominance first, and we're going to do so with the trait of flower color. Now, the difference here is what the name implies. Instead of two versions of the trait, where one version is dominant and the other is recessive, instead, in incomplete dominance, we still have two versions of a trait, in this case, red flower color and white flower color, but neither red nor white is dominant, and neither red nor white is recessive. They're equal. They are of equal strength. So the first difference that you should notice is that instead of having things marked with capital letters and lowercase letters to represent dominant and recessive, we can't do that because nothing is dominant and nothing is recessive, so we want to shy away from capital and lowercase. Instead, what you're noticing is that I'm using something called superscripts. So I've chosen to use the letter F here simply because we're talking about flowers, but then to represent the allele for red flower color, I've used a superscript R, and to represent the allele for white flower color, the superscript W. Neither's dominant, neither's recessive, they are equal. So of course, with these two possibilities, there end up being three possible genotypes. That hasn't changed. You could have a flower that inherits a gene for red, an allele for red and an allele for red. So two red alleles, of course, is going to result in a phenotype of a red flower. You could have a flower that inherits an allele for white and an allele for white. Two alleles for white. There's not much mystery. That flower is going to appear white. It will have a white phenotype. None of that's exactly newsworthy. Where incomplete dominance comes into play is in the heterozygous situation. That heterozygous condition is right here. A flower inherits an allele for red and an allele for white. Neither one's dominant, neither one's recessive, and therefore the phenotype that results is going to be a blend. And I really do emphasize that word blend. If there's anything I want you to affiliate with the idea of incomplete dominance, it is the word blend. You end up with a pink flower. So here, homozygous red results in a red flower. Homozygous white results in a white flower. And heterozygous results in a pink flower. Three different genotypes, three different phenotypes that result. And if you look at the square that is our example over here, what I've chosen to do is to have a parent, in this case, that is pink, and another parent that is pink. And so when you cross two pink parents, bring down the red, bring across the red, that offspring would be a red flower. Bring down the W, bring over the R, there's a pink. Down, across, another pink. Down, across, and we have a white. So you cross two pink flowers, you might get a red flower. You might get a white flower, or you could get more pink. 25% red, 25% white, 50% pink as the probabilities. Now, we basically keep that same idea, but let's change the trait so that it is instead a codominant trait. Let's imagine that we're dealing with a different species of flower, and the flower color trait in that different species does not operate based on incomplete dominance. It instead operates based on codominance. We're going to keep everything the same right here. We have F with the superscript R to represent red, F with the superscript W to represent white. 2 red alleles, of course, is going to give you a red flower. 2 white alleles is still going to give you a white flower. Where codominance comes into play is down here. Now, with incomplete dominance, what I told you is that neither trait is dominant nor recessive. The deal with codominance is that both versions of the trait are dominant. And so you have, again, a sort of a power struggle. They're both of equal footing, of equal strength, but the outcome is different. Instead of getting a blend, which is the word I want you to affiliate with incomplete dominance, you instead get what I have written down here in these parentheses. You get instead a mixture. And that's the word I want you to affiliate with codominance. Blend, incomplete dominance. Mixture, codominance. You would instead get a flower that is not pink, but has splotches of red and splotches of white as part of the flower petals. The square itself is absolutely no different. The only difference is how you interpret it. Here, well, number one, we're not crossing 2 pink flowers. We're crossing a flower that's red and white with another flower that's red and white. This offspring would be red. This offspring would be white. The only difference is that these 2 offspring would be red and white, not pink. And so if we look at this picture, over here on the left, I have this here to try to represent the idea of incomplete dominance. Here's a red flower, here's a white flower, and the offspring here, I don't know how well you can tell because the color isn't very bright, but those are supposed to be pink offspring. In other words, a blend. Over here, you can see a flower that is red and white. This would be a flower that operates under the premise of codominance, a mixture.